Guys, so with today we're gonna be reacting to the truth about George Washington owning slaves. Let's see what he had to say. Make sure you like and subscribe. Let's go.
We will bring to you the stand of one of the founding fathers of the United States, George Washington, as regard to slavery. This extract is gotten from the book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Dr. Thomas Sowell. George Washington
I have
was
to
one of
read that
those who
book.
had inherited slaves, and, dying childless, freed his slaves in his will, effective on the death of his wife. His will also provide that slaves too old or too beset with bodily infirmities, not able to take care of themselves, should be taken care of by his estate, and that the children were to be taught to read in his estate. In fact, he continued to pay for the support of some freed slaves, for decades after his death, in accordance with his will. And the tone, as well
Did
as
you
the
know
length
that?
of it, showed his concerns. The Emancipation Clause stands out from the rest of Washington's will, in the unique forcefulness of its language. Elsewhere in it, Washington used the standard legal expressions, I give and bequeath, it is my will and direction. In one instance he politely wrote, by way of advice, I recommend to my executors. But the Emancipation Clause rings with the voice of command. It has the iron firmness of a field order. I do hereby expressly forbid the sale of any slave I may die possessed of, under any pretext whatsoever. Long before reaching this point in his personal life, George Washington had said of slavery as a national issue, there is not a man living who wishes more sincerely than I do to see a plan adopted for the abolition of it. But, like Burke, he saw a need for a plan of some sort, rather than simply freeing millions of slaves in a newly emerging nation surrounded by threatening powers, just as the freed slaves themselves would be surrounded by a hostile population.
So basically, if he wanted to abolish the slave, then the nation would never be built, right? Based on those standards, right? The fear. So he maybe by he starting to neglect, I didn't know this, neglecting slavery, but as a personal opinion and practice, that could just influence in the long run, and of course, in the long run, being abolished because of the
In short,
influence.
the moral principle was easy, but figuring out how to apply it in
Yeah,
practice was not.
that's when the
Moreover, in a
state
country
right
with an
comes in.
elected government, how the white population at large felt could not be ignored. When Washington congratulated Lafayette for the latter's purchase of a plantation where former slaves could live, he added, would to God a like spirit would diffuse itself generally into the minds of the people of this country, but I despair of seeing it. He saw legislation as the only way to end slavery and said that a legislator who did that would get his vote. Slaves that Washington took north with him after completing his terms as president, in effect freeing them, on the sly, as one biographer put it, at a time when to free them officially could have set off controversies. George Washington was, after all, trying to hold together a fragile coalition of states
Yeah,
bearing little resemblance to the world power that the United States would become in later centuries. As a slave owner in Virginia, Washington thought of ways he might sublet much of his estate, in which his current slaves might be hired by the year, as laborers by tenant farmers.
mm,
He was clearly casting about for some way, as he put it in a letter, to liberate a certain species of property which I possess very repugnantly to my own feelings. But there were
there
no
we go.
takers.
See, basically, let me just do it from my perspective, because I don't believe in this practice. Give them their freedom, because on my own belief. But that doesn't mean I'm gonna legislate. Yeah, because I understand what he's saying.
Washington's behavior as a slave owner is also worth noting. Beginning in the early 1770s, he rarely bought a slave and he would not sell one, unless the slave consented, which never happened. Not
Hmm.
selling slaves was an economic loss. Slave labor on a plantation with soil as poor as Mount Vernon brought in little or nothing. The only
Interesting.
profit a man in his position would make was by selling slaves to states where agriculture was more flourishing. Washington would not. I am principled against selling Negroes as you would do cattle at a market. From 1775 until his death, the slave population at Mount Vernon more than doubled.
Wow.
Even a sympathetic biography of George Washington, for example, said, he had helped to create a new world but had allowed into it an infection that he feared would eventually destroy it. This
Hmm.
statement is breathtaking in its assumptions. That he feared would eventually destroy it. Even to have made slavery a public issue at the time would have accomplished nothing except to jeopardize the survival of a fragile coalition of newly independent states.
Okay.
Yet this man who contributed more than anyone else to the introduction of free republican government in the modern world is widely seen as being under a moral cloud, as if he had chosen to introduce or abet slavery. Washington's actual behavior illustrated what Adam Smith had said decades earlier, in his theory of moral sentiments, that a man prompted by humanity and benevolence, when he cannot establish the right, will not disdain to ameliorate the wrong. If you like this kind of
Wow, wow, didn't know that. Wow, didn't know that. Give me more respect for George Washington. Fact that he wanted slave to just read and educate themselves, and by his personal preference, let them leave even if he lose money. I have to respect that. I have to. I have to. Didn't know about this about him. Clearly, there's a side of the aisle that wanted to abolish the entire United States, I guess, but they don't want to see these facts. I think maybe these people that have a different agenda that are really not. We're not on the same page. All right. Love this country with all my heart. And slavery was a thing that happened everywhere. You understand that? Everywhere. Mexico has slavery. Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Colombia. Uh, the list goes on and on. Cuba, Dominican Republic. Can we talk about that? I mean, Jamaica. I mean, it goes on and on. What about here in the United States? The second most important bias were the Native Americans. We can keep going on. Right? Slavery just was a thing. Everybody was slave. Everybody. Everybody that have legs and arms. If they can pick up a rock, you going in. You going in. How do I know that? Because it happens today, and it has no preference of race. Okay. Huh? You see the cartels. Uh, I mean, let me not go down the rabbit hole because I can go deep, 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 where I can say that there's a lot of people that are right now victim of slavery. If slavery was really an issue of people really care about slavery, we will stop all the slavery that's going on right now from people that are crossing the border and being taking. Let me not talk too much. I might have got banned. I remember when I was living in Flushing, New York, right? People were slaves in certain areas to do adult things. Slave. How do I know that? Because I knew a couple people from that area, right? They knew not that they were doing, but they knew about how that thing. Why were they outside selling themselves and all that stuff? It's because they were slaves. Some of these people, they were from China, and there's a couple North Koreans there too. And in order for them to just live in the United States, they had to pay the price because I mean it's horrendous. That's slavery right there. Why we're not doing anything right here in the United States, in New York? What about in L.A.? I mean, what about Texas and Austin? I mean, all these places that real things happening, but nobody's talking about that. We want to talk about George Washington owning some slaves, right? I don't even know where Puerto Rico will be. I mean, in Puerto Rico, there's a couple places that we have founding universities, like in the Inter-American University of San Germán, that area where it's located right now. That was a plantation, a slave plantation. Yeah, that was a slave plantation before the Americans came and they was in the beginning of the 20th century, and what was an old plantation they made it to Christian University. I'm just saying, man, it just goes to show you, right? If we really care about these topics, man, we will just fight to just stop it right now. That's all I'm saying. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. If you agree with me, let me know. If you don't disagree with me, it's fine. Just let me know in the comment section below. We love disagreement. With that, I'm out.